I found 15 wolves buried in the snow at 4 in the morning. And my first thought was not, call 911. It was, Jasper, you absolute idiot. You should have stayed home. That's me, Jasper Calloway, 23 years old, registered Omega, licensed wildlife emergency responder out of Whitfield, New Hampshire, and apparently the only person alive crazy enough to hike 2 miles into a February blizzard because his scanner picked up an unusual heat signature off the Monadnock Trail. The wind was cutting through my jacket like it had a personal grudge. My fingers were numb inside my gloves. My boots were soaked through. And somewhere around mile 1, the battery on my flashlight had quietly decided to retire. I was navigating entirely by moonlight, which honestly should have been my sign to turn back. But I kept walking. Because that is the thing about psychometry. When something out there is carrying real pain, I feel it before I ever see it. A low pulse pressing against the back of my hand from the wrong side of my skin, like a cry that skips sound and goes straight to bone. It had started the moment I stepped off the trail. A steady, aching pull threading through my gloves, up my arms, all the way to the back of my teeth. Something was out here. Something alive. Barely. I almost stepped on the first one. He was half buried in a snowdrift, silver-gray fur packed with ice, his sides moving so slightly I had to stare to be sure. I dropped to my knees so fast the snow hit my face. My gloves were off before my brain caught up with my hands, palms flat against his flank, vision immediate, running, fast, violent, desperate. A forest I did not recognize, pine trees with bark like dark iron, a sky slightly the wrong shade of blue, and then stopping, all of them, at once, like something large and invisible reached down and simply switched them off. No wounds, no predator, just cold, spreading through fur and muscle and marrow until movement became a memory. I yanked my hands back and pressed them hard against my thighs until the images dissolved. Then I counted 15. I counted twice because I did not believe it the first time. 15 wolves scattered across a clearing I had no name for, arranged in no pattern I could read, as if they had simply fallen mid-step. Breathing shallow, heart rates slow enough to make my own chest tighten, alive, but barely, caught somewhere between this world and whatever had pulled them under. I stood up, looked at 15 wolves who would not survive to sunrise without help. Then I called my partner. Marcus. A pause. His voice was thick with sleep. Jasper, it is 4 in the morning. Congratulations on telling time. I need the emergency trailer. The big one. 15 wolves, hypothermic, unconscious. Sending coordinates now. Silence. Then, 15. Yes. Jasper. Marcus. He exhaled the long, suffering sigh of a man who had known me for 6 years and understood that arguing was a waste of both our lives. I am up. Do not touch them. I had already touched one. I did not mention that. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos. I moved fast across the clearing, laying emergency thermal blankets over each body, talking low the entire time, partly for them, mostly to keep my own nerves from eating the alive. I kept my gloves on. Psychometry stays quiet behind the leather as long as I am careful, and I needed to stay functional. But there was one I kept returning to, larger than the others, black fur that looked almost blue under the moonlight, a build that sat wrong in my memory the longer I studied it. He was positioned slightly apart from the group, like even unconscious, something in him refused closeness. His breathing was the most stable of the 15. That should have reassured me. It did not, because every time I stepped near him, something shifted in the air. A warmth that had no business existing in that temperature. A scent that moved through the cold, and the pine, and the wet snow like it had been searching specifically for me. Dark cedar, stormwater, something underneath that I did not have a name for yet. I stood over him a moment longer than necessary. My chest did something I refused to acknowledge. Don't. I told myself out loud, which is, I know, a strong indicator of either excellent self-awareness or the early stages of hypothermia. I laid the blanket over him and went back to work. By the time Marcus arrived with the trailer and 2 other volunteers, the sky had begun to pale at the edges. 15 wolves loaded, vitals stabilizing, my hands aching from the cold, and something else I could not explain. I was almost at the truck when I turned back toward the clearing. Empty. Just snow, silence, and the shallow impressions where 15 lives had been. I did not know what I had just pulled out of that forest. I did not know yet that one of them would destroy everything I thought I understood about myself. The Whitfield Wildlife Emergency Center smelled like antiseptic, wet fur, and Marcus's terrible gas station coffee. It was the kind of smell that said functional, but barely, which honestly described most of my life. I had changed into dry clothes from the bag I kept in my locker for exactly these situations, eaten half a granola bar, and was on my 3rd cup of the terrible coffee when the first wolf opened his eyes. Not the black one of the gray ones. Young, lean, probably 2 years old in human terms. He blinked at the recovery room ceiling with the deeply offended expression of someone who had just woken up in a place they had absolutely not agreed to visit. I watched him through the observation window and felt something loosen slightly in my chest. "Good morning," I said, even though he could not hear me through the glass. He sneezed. Twice, then put his head back down. "Tough crowd," I muttered. Marcus appeared at my shoulder with a tablet, running through vitals on each animal. Heart rates normalized, body temperatures climbing. No structural injuries, no signs of predator contact, no obvious medical explanation for why 15 wolves had gone down simultaneously in the middle of a forest. The preliminary bloods were clean. Whatever had happened to them out there, it was nothing our standard diagnostics could read, which meant it was probably something I was going to have to touch my way through. Literally. I was not thrilled about this. Psychometry is not a gift so much as it is a very loud neighbor who never respects your schedule. Objects, animals, people, anything with an emotional history pressed against my skin will talk whether I want it to or not. Some days it is useful. Some days I spend 20 minutes holding a stranger's lost glove and watching their entire argument with their ex-wife play out in my head like a movie I never asked to watch. I pulled on my thinnest pair of latex gloves and pushed open the recovery room door. 14 wolves, breathing steady, settling into the warmth of the heated mats with the heavy, boneless relief of creatures whose bodies had decided to start cooperating again. I moved through the room quietly, checking each one by sight, taking notes on a clipboard, doing exactly what I was supposed to do. And then I reached Bay 15. Empty. The thermal blanket was pushed to one side. The restraint strap, which I want to be clear was a very solid restraint strap, was on the floor. And the wolf that had been lying there 30 minutes ago, the large one with the black fur and the blue undertone, and the scent that had no business being warm, was gone. I stood there for one full second. Then I said out loud, to no one, "Are you kidding me?" I found him 6 steps later, standing in the corner of the room behind the medication cabinet, fully upright, watching me with eyes that were not wolf eyes. Not entirely. They were gold, not the soft amber that some wolves carry, a hard, burning gold that caught the fluorescent light and held it in a way that made the back of my neck do something I chose to ignore. He was enormous. Standing, he cleared the cabinet by several inches. His fur was damp and still slightly matted with ice at the edges, and he looked like something that had walked out of a story that was older than this building, older than this town, maybe older than the concept of emergency wildlife permits. He looked at me. I looked at him. "You," I said slowly, "are supposed to be unconscious." He did not move. His gaze tracked my face with a focus that was too deliberate, too structured for a disoriented animal waking from hypothermia. There was nothing panicked in him, nothing confused, Just that gold stare, patient and heavy, like he had already decided something about me and was waiting for me to catch up. My psychometry flared without permission. A wave of sensation hit through the latex gloves, muted but real. Not images this time, just feeling. Weight, authority, and underneath it, pressed down so hard it was nearly invisible, something that felt like exhaustion so deep it had become grief. I breathed through it, kept my face neutral. "Okay," I said carefully, taking one slow step toward him. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to let me check your temperature because you were clinically hypothermic 45 minutes ago, and the fact that you are standing is either a miracle or a lawsuit waiting to happen. And then you are going to go back to your mat." He took one step toward me. My heart did something complicated. His scent hit again, stronger now without the snow to dilute it. Cedar, stormwater, and that third thing underneath, the one I still could not name, pressing into the air between us like a question I was not ready to answer. I held my ground, because I am Jasper Calloway, and I do not back down from wolves, even ones that look at me like they already know my name. Even ones that look at me like they already know my name. He stopped 2 feet away from me, and that was close enough for my entire respiratory system to file a formal complaint. Up close, he was even more unreasonable. The kind of size that did not feel aggressive so much as inevitable, like standing near something that had simply decided it belonged wherever it stood. His chest rose and fell with a steadiness that made no biological sense, given where he had been an hour ago. His gold eyes had not moved off my face once. I kept my clipboard between us like it was going to do anything. "Temperature check," I said. "Non-negotiable." He lowered his head slightly. Not submission, more like the gesture of someone who finds you interesting enough to humor. I chose to interpret that as consent and reached for the thermometer on the supply shelf to my left. My hands were steady. I was very proud of my hands. My pulse, on the other hand, was doing something rhythmically irresponsible that I planned to address later in private. I pressed the thermometer gently against the inside of his ear. The moment my gloved fingers made contact with his fur, psychometry detonated through the latex like the gloves were tissue paper. I did not get images this time either. What I got was worse. A full sensory hit, sharp and immediate. The weight of command so old it had become instinct. The particular loneliness of someone who had spent years being obeyed and almost never understood. And underneath all of it, threaded through like a wire pulled too tight, something that felt like recognition, like the specific ache of finding something you had stopped believing existed. I pulled my hand back the second the thermometer beeped. 99.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Rising. Good. "You are warming up," I said, mostly to fill the silence, because the silence between us was doing things I did not appreciate. Which is great. Medically, wonder news for everyone. He watched me write the number on my clipboard. "You know," I continued, because apparently stress makes me narrate, "most of my patients cannot stare. It is one of the more relaxing parts of the job. You are ruining a system that has worked very well for me." His head tilted, fractionally, like he had understood every word and found it mildly entertaining. I pointed at the recovery mat. "Go lie down." He did not go lie down. Instead, he took one more step, slow and deliberate, and I got the full weight of his scent at point-blank range. Cedar, that deep, clean, stormwater cold. And the third thing, the one underneath, hit me so clearly this time that my psychometry read it without my hands being anywhere near him. Home. That was the only word my brain produced, which was insane, which was a stress response, which I was filing under things to unpack in therapy and moving on from immediately. Absolutely not, I told my own nervous system. The wolf made a sound, low, quiet, not quite a growl and not quite anything I had a clinical term for. It moved through the air and landed somewhere behind my sternum without asking permission. I took one controlled step back. Listen, I get that you are confused. Waking up in a strange place after whatever happened to you out there. That is fair. That is a reasonable response. But I need you to understand that I am a professional, and I have a system. And the system involves you being on that mat and me being over here with my clipboard. And right now you are aggressively violating the system. He looked at the mat. He looked back at me. Then he turned and walked, at his own pace and on his own terms, back to the mat. He turned once before lying down, the way wolves do when they are settling, except his eyes never left my face during the entire process. And when he finally lowered himself down, he did it with the energy of someone making a choice rather than following a direction. Like he was doing me a favor. Thank you, I said, with exactly the amount of sarcasm the moment deserved. I went back to my notes, or I tried to. My pen kept stopping. My eyes kept moving back to Bay 15 without my permission. He was watching the ceiling now, still and quiet, but there was nothing restful about it. He was thinking. Whatever was behind those gold eyes was moving fast and deliberate and very far from sleep. Marcus appeared in the doorway behind me. All 15 stable. You want to call the wildlife registry? See if anyone filed a missing pack report? Already on my list, I said. Jasper. His voice shifted slightly, dropping into the particular tone he used when he was about to say something I would not like. The big one in Bay 15. What about him? His scent. I kept my eyes on my clipboard. I am not having this conversation. It is pretty strong. Marcus, I am just saying it is registering even from the doorway, and I have a very average sense of smell, and even I can tell that is not a regular wolf. I wrote a number on my clipboard that I would later realize was completely made up. Go make coffee, I said. Better coffee. The gas station era is over. He left. I exhaled. Bay 15 stayed quiet, but the scent followed me all the way to the other side of the room. I spent the next hour doing everything in the correct order. Vitals logged, feed schedules drafted, recovery notes typed into the system with the focused energy of someone who was absolutely not thinking about Bay 15. I called the Regional Wildlife Registry and left a message. I emailed the New Hampshire Fish and Game Office with a preliminary incident report. I ate the other half of my granola bar standing over the sink like a person who had their life together. I was fine. I was completely fine. You have checked on him 4 times, Marcus said from behind his desk, without looking up from his screen. I have been doing rounds. You did not check on any of the other 14. The other 14 are not medically interesting. Marcus looked up. He had the face of a man who had many thoughts and the self-preservation instincts to keep most of them behind his teeth. Okay, it is a professional assessment. Sure, based on clinical observation. Jasper, what? You left your pen in his bay. I looked down at my hand. Clipboard, no pen. I looked back at Marcus. He looked back at me with the serene expression of someone who had already won. I walked back to Bay 15. The pen was on the floor near the edge of the mat, which meant at some point I had been close enough to drop it there without noticing, which was information I was choosing not to examine. I crouched to pick it up and made the mistake of being at eye level with him. He was not asleep. He had not been asleep once since he walked himself back to that mat. He was lying with his head on his front paws, watching the door with a patience that felt less like rest and more like strategy. When I crouched down, his gaze shifted to me immediately. That gold, steady and unbothered, and entirely too aware. I am just getting my pen, I said. He blinked, slow, deliberate. Do not look at me like that. He kept looking at me like that. I picked up the pen, and then because my hands have always had a worse sense of self-preservation than my brain, I did not stand back up right away. I stayed crouched, eye level, close enough that his scent was sitting heavy in the air between us, cedar and storm, and that third thing that my nervous system had decided to call home against my explicit instructions. "What happened to you out there?" I said quietly. Not a clinical question, something else. The kind of question that comes from the part of you that already knows the answer is going to matter. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he shifted, slowly, moved one massive paw forward across the mat until the edge of it was almost touching my knee. Not a threat, not a demand, the gentlest possible version of a reach. My psychometry came awake under my skin like a held breath finally released. Even without contact, even with the latex gloves still on, his proximity was loud. The same heavy authority, the same deep wire exhaustion. But something new now, closer to the surface. A specific, sharp worry directed outward toward the other 14. He was not thinking about himself at all. Whatever had put 15 wolves on the ground in a forest, he had been trying to stop it, not escape it. That landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. "Your pack," I said softly. Something moved through his gold eyes, not surprise, closer to relief. The particular relief of being understood by someone you had not expected to try. I stood up before I did something medically inadvisable. "They are all stable, all 14. Heart rates normal, temperatures climbing, nobody lost." I kept my voice level and clinical because that was the only register I trusted myself in right now. "Whatever you were doing out there, it worked. They are okay." He exhaled. The sound of it was so human, I took a step back just to reestablish some personal boundary infrastructure. And then the lights flickered. Not a power surge. The fluorescents held their hum. But the temperature in the room dropped fast enough that my breath clouded in front of my face. And every single wolf in every single bay came awake at once. 14 heads lifting simultaneously, ears forward, bodies going rigid with a collective tension that raised every hair on my arms. Bay 15 moved first. He was on his feet before I registered he had stood, and he stepped directly in front of me. Not touching, just positioned, between me and the door with a clarity that required no translation. Something was outside, something that had followed them here. My psychometry screamed up both arms without warning. No contact needed, just proximity to whatever was pressing against the outside of this building. I got a flash, not images, pure sensation. Cold that was not weather, intent that was not animal. I pressed my back against the supply shelf and looked at the wolf standing between me and the door. "Okay," I said very quietly, "so that is a thing that is happening." His head turned back to me, just for a second, and in that second, in the space between whatever was outside and whatever was building between us inside, I understood something I was not remotely prepared for. He had not stayed near my bay because he was disoriented. He had stayed because he had already decided I was his to protect. I did not have time to process what that meant because the front door of the center hit its frame hard enough to rattle the supply shelf behind me, and Marcus shouted something from the front room that my brain translated as both a curse word and a prayer simultaneously. I moved, not away from the door, toward it, because whatever was out there had found its way to my building, my patients, and my coworker, and I did not do retreat well under the best of circumstances. The black wolf moved with me, not blocking me this time, beside me, one step back and to the left, like a position he had practiced, like flanking was a language his body already knew. I pushed through the recovery room door into the front corridor and stopped. 3 men stood inside the entrance. They had not knocked. They had not buzzed the after-hours bell. The security panel on the wall showed green, which meant the door had been unlocked from outside with a code that only 4 people on Earth were supposed to have. Marcus was standing behind the front desk with the particular stillness of someone running threat assessments and not loving the results. The 3 men were tall, dressed in dark outdoor gear, and completely dry, despite the fact that it had been snowing heavily for the last 3 hours. The one in the center was looking directly at me, not at Marcus, not at the facility, at me, like he had come specifically for me and the building was just an inconvenience between us. He was blonde, sharp-featured, the kind of attractive that arrives preloaded with warning signs. His eyes were pale gray, and they moved over me with a clinical assessment that made my skin feel like it was being read without my consent. "Jasper Calloway," he said, not a question. "Depends on who's asking and how you got my door code." His mouth moved into something adjacent to a smile. "We're here for the wolves." The wolves are patients in my care, and visiting hours ended approximately never, because this is a wildlife facility and not a petting zoo. You can call the main line in the morning and speak to our intake coordinator. The man on his left shifted his weight. Something in the air of the corridor changed texture. My psychometry picked it up through my boot soles, through the floor, a vibration that was not sound. Cold, intent, organized, pointed directly at the recovery room behind me. I stepped slightly to the left so my body was more fully in the doorway. "Mr. Calloway," the blond man's voice stayed pleasant. That was the part that bothered me most. Genuine threats do not usually bother with pleasantness. Those animals belong to a private pack. We've been authorized to retrieve them. By who? They're alpha. Behind me, the black wolf made a sound, low and singular, and it moved through the corridor like a frequency rather than a noise. All three men went still. Not startled still, wary still. The specific stillness of people who recognized what they had just heard and were recalibrating. The blond man's pleasant expression did not change, but his pale gray eyes moved from me to the space behind my shoulder, and something shifted in them. Something that looked, very briefly, like fear wearing the mask of composure. "Step aside," he said, quieter now. "I will not," I said, at exactly the same volume. My hands were steady at my sides. My psychometry was firing in controlled bursts, reading the room in fragments. The man on the right was nervous, genuinely, the kind that comes from being somewhere you know you should not be. The man on the left was focused, mission-shaped, not cruel but not careful either. The blonde one in the center was the variable. His emotional signature was layered in a way that took me an extra second to parse, and when I did, what I found underneath the composure was not aggression. It was urgency. Desperate, tightly controlled urgency. He needed those wolves. Not for violence, for something else entirely. Something that had a deadline attached to it that I could feel pressing against the edges of his emotional field, like water behind a cracking wall. That did not mean I was letting him in. "You have two options," I said. "You can give me the name of the authorizing alpha, your pack registration number, and a legal retrieval order signed by a licensed Omegaverse pack affairs officer. Or you can leave and come back when you have those things. Those are the options. There is not a third one." The blond man studied me for a long moment. The urgency behind his composure pressed harder. He glanced once more at the space behind my shoulder. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a card. He set it on the front desk without breaking eye contact with me. "Tell him," the man said quietly, "that Callum says the window is closing. He'll understand what that means." He turned. The other two followed. The door closed behind them with less drama than it had opened with, which somehow made it worse. Silence landed over the corridor. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been compressed for the last 4 minutes. "Jasper, I know. Who were those men?" "I do not know yet. The big wolf in Bay 15. I turned around. The black wolf was standing directly behind me, close enough that I nearly stepped into him. His gold eyes were fixed on the door. His posture was not aggressive. It was the precise, controlled stillness of something very powerful, choosing very deliberately not to move. I picked up the card from the desk without looking away from him. One line, black ink on white cardstock. Callum Reed, Pack Affairs Liaison, Western Territory Division. And below it, in smaller text, a title I had only ever read in official Omegaverse governance documents and one very dramatic documentary I had watched in college. Office of the Alpha King. The card sat in my hand and the corridor sat in silence, and the wolf in front of me finally moved his gaze from the door to my face. I looked at the card. I looked at him. "Okay," I said slowly, "so you are not a regular wolf." His gold eyes held mine and did not even have the grace to look apologetic. I set the card down on the desk with the careful precision of someone who was not spiraling even a little bit. Then I picked it up again, read it one more time, set it back down. "Alpha King," I said out loud, because sometimes hearing words in your own voice helps them become real. The wolf watched me work through it. "As in, the Alpha King of the entire North American pack system, that Alpha King." He blinked, slow and steady, the way he did everything, like the concept of rushing had simply never occurred to him. "You were in my forest," I said, "buried in snow, in New Hampshire, at 4 a.m. Nothing, just those gold eyes and that unreasonable stillness. I took your temperature with a livestock thermometer. A very subtle shift in his expression. If wolves could look rueful, that was the closest approximation I had ever witnessed in 6 years of wildlife work. I pulled up a stool and sat down because my legs had apparently filed their own response to this information, and it was a seated one. Marcus had gone very quiet behind his desk, in the particular way of someone who was pretending to do paperwork while absorbing every word of a conversation that would absolutely be retold at every staff gathering for the next decade. "Okay," I said, "here is what I know. 15 wolves went down simultaneously in a forest 2 miles from this facility. No wounds, no predator contact, no chemical explanation in the preliminary bloods. You were the most stable of the 15, but the only one who was not where I left him when I came back. 3 men showed up with my private door code and a retrieval order from the office of the Alpha King, and the card they left has that same title on it. And you are looking at me right now like none of this is particularly surprising to you." He held my gaze. "Is any of this surprising to you?" He lowered his head slightly, the same gesture from before. Patient, almost fond. "I need you to shift," I said. The air in the corridor changed. Even Marcus looked up. "I know that is a significant ask," I continued, keeping my voice even. "And I understand if there are political or security reasons why you have not already done that. But I am currently standing between you and 3 men with access to my building's security codes. I have 14 other wolves in my care whose situation I do not fully understand, and my psychometry is picking up something with a deadline attached to it that I cannot read clearly enough to act on. So I need you to be a person right now, if you can." The silence stretched, long enough that I thought he was going to refuse. Then it happened. Shifting in wolves is not the dramatic Hollywood version. It is quiet and fast and slightly wrong in the way that all genuinely extraordinary things are slightly wrong, like the world has to bend a little to accommodate them. One moment he was there, black fur and gold eyes in impossible size. The next the air shuddered once, soft and sharp at the same time, and he was kneeling on the recovery room floor in human form. And I want to be clear that I was a professional. I kept my eyes on his face. His face was not easier. Strong jaw, dark hair still damp at the edges, skin pale in the fluorescent light, and carved with a kind of bone structure that belonged in a different century. And those eyes, gold in wolf form, gold in human form, steady and burning and fixed entirely on me. He was also, which I noted purely for medical and logistical reasons, built like someone who had never once in his life done anything halfway. Marcus made a sound behind me. I turned and pointed at him. He went back to his paperwork. The man on the floor stayed kneeling, not because he was diminished, because he was choosing it, the way he chose everything, deliberately and on his own terms. He looked up at me from that position with an authority that had nothing to do with height or posture, and everything to do with the particular quality of his attention. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough from disuse, or from cold, or from whatever had put 15 wolves on the ground in a February forest. It landed in the center of my chest like a stone dropped into still water. "Jasper Calloway," he said, not a question, not a greeting. My name in his mouth like he had already learned the shape of it. "That's me," I said, "and you are—" "Elias Cole." A pause. "Alpha King of the North American Pack System, Eastern and Western Territories." "Elias," I repeated. Something moved through his gold eyes at that, quick and unguarded, gone before I could fully read it. Like hearing his name without a title attached was something that had not happened in a very long time, and his face had not been prepared to hide the response. I filed that away. "The window Callum mentioned," I said. "What does that mean?" Elias looked at me steadily. "It means we have approximately 4 hours before the thing that put my pack on that mountain finds us here." The facility hummed around us. 14 wolves breathing in their bays, snow pressing against the windows, and Elias Cole, Alpha King, kneeling on my recovery room floor, looking up at me like I was somehow the most important variable in an equation he had been running for a very long time. 4 hours, I said. "Yes. And you are telling me this now?" "I am telling you this now." I stood up off the stool. "Then you should probably start from the beginning." He rose from the floor in one motion, smooth and unhurried, and when he reached his full height, the room felt measurably smaller. He looked at me for one quiet moment before he spoke. "It started 6 weeks ago," he said, with assent. His eyes did not move from mine when he said it, and the third thing underneath the cedar and the storm water finally had a name. It was mine. I stood very still and let that sentence do what it was going to do to me, which was considerable. The facility hummed. The snow pressed the windows. 14 wolves breathed in their bays with the peaceful indifference of animals who had not just heard something that rearranged the furniture of an entire person's understanding. "Say that again," I said. Elias held my gaze without flinching. 6 weeks ago, I caught a scent on the wind during a territorial assessment near the Connecticut border. I have been Alpha King for 11 years. In 11 years, I have never experienced a scent recognition event. I knew what it meant the moment it happened. "A scent recognition event," I repeated. "A fated mate signal." The words landed flat and enormous, the way very large things do when they arrive without warning. I looked at him. He looked at me. The corridor was very quiet. "You are telling me," I said slowly, "that 6 weeks ago from the Connecticut border you smelled me?" "Yes. I live in New Hampshire. I am aware. That is over 100 miles. I am aware of that also." I turned around, walked 3 steps toward the window, turned back. "And then what? You tracked me across state lines with 15 members of your pack in the middle of winter." "Not immediately." Something shifted in his jaw, a tightening barely visible. "There were protocols to follow, documentation. A fated mate identification requires pack affairs verification before any formal approach can be initiated. I spent 4 weeks going through proper channels." "Proper channels," I said, "for finding a person, for protecting them," he said, and the quiet force behind it stopped me from saying the next thing I had lined up. "A fated mate to the Alpha King carries a target before the bond is ever formed. There are people who would use that knowledge before I could reach you. I was trying to get to you safely. Last night something accelerated the timeline, and I made a decision to move before verification was complete." "What accelerated it?" His gold eyes held steady. "Someone else found your scent first." The temperature of the room did something unpleasant. I thought about the cold pressing against the outside of the building earlier. The intent behind it that my psychometry had read as organized and pointed, not animal. "Callum's window," I said. "Yes." I exhaled through my nose and looked at the ceiling for approximately 2 seconds. Okay, so, unknown threat, fated mate protocol, cross-state scent tracking, and an exploding timeline. That is a full evening. I looked back at him. How did 15 wolves end up frozen on a mountain? The tightening in his jaw returned, more pronounced this time. That is the part I need you to understand before I say anything else. I am listening. What happened on that mountain was not done to us. He paused, one beat, weighted and deliberate. It originated from this location, from this direction. It has been building for weeks. Irregular pulses of something I could not identify, growing stronger the closer we got. Last night it peaked, and the exposure was too direct and too concentrated for the pack to stay conscious through it. I heard what he said. I heard all of it. I even understood the grammatical content of each individual word. What my brain refused to complete was the logical conclusion at the end of it. You are saying something from here, put your pack down. Yes. From this facility? No. He took one careful step toward me. Not from this facility, from you. The silence that followed was the loudest I had experienced in my adult life. That is not possible, I said. Jasper, psychometry is a reading ability. It receives. It does not transmit. It does not project. It certainly does not reach 2 miles into a forest and drop 15 wolves into hypothermic unconsciousness. My voice was steady. I was very focused on keeping it steady. That is not what I am. That is not what my ability does. What you are, Elias said quietly, and what your ability has been categorized as may not be the same thing. Do not do that. Do what? Speak to me calmly about the possibility that I am a danger to other living things. My voice cracked at the edge. Just slightly. I brought it back. I have spent my entire career helping animals. I have spent 6 years in this building reading pain and trauma and injury through my hands so I could help creatures who cannot tell me what is wrong. If you are standing in my facility telling me that I have been hurting things without knowing it, I stopped. Because my psychometry had just done something it had never done before. It fired outward, not a read, not a reception of someone else's emotional signal. A pulse originating behind my sternum, moving outward through my skin in a ring I could feel but not see. And every wolf in every bay made a sound at once. Not distress, recognition, like 14 animals turning toward a frequency they already knew. The room tilted slightly. Elias crossed the distance between us in 2 steps, and his hands came up, not grabbing, just present, bracketing my arms without quite touching. Breathe, he said, low and steady. I am breathing. You went pale. I am naturally pale. It is February. His hands settled, warm through my sleeves. My psychometry read him instantly at that contact. And what came through was not authority or command, or the weight of 11 years of leadership. What came through was fear, clean and specific. The fear of someone watching something fragile move toward an edge, and not knowing if they were close enough to catch it. He was afraid for me. I looked up at him from a distance of approximately 8 inches, and the cedar scent wrapped around the whole moment like it had been waiting for exactly this. How long have I been doing it? I said. His hands tightened slightly on my arms. We started tracking the pulses 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks. 2 weeks before he caught my scent on the wind. The thing behind my sternum pulsed again, smaller this time, and one of the wolves in the recovery room made a low, soft sound that I recognized from 6 years of practice. It was the sound of comfort being offered. I pressed my eyes closed for 3 seconds. Opened them. You came here to warn me, I said. I came here, Elias said, and his voice had dropped into something quieter and more careful than anything he had used yet. Because you are my fated mate, and something is happening to your ability that you do not have the information to understand yet, and I was not willing to let you face that without knowing. I looked at him for a long moment. You could have called, I said. Something broke open behind his gold eyes, brief and bright and completely unguarded. He laughed. It was short and surprised and real, the kind of laugh that comes from a person who does not do it often enough. And it rearranged his entire face into something that made my chest do several things at once that I was not prepared to categorize. Then his expression settled back into seriousness, and he looked at me with that focused, burning steadiness and said, "There is one more thing." The laugh had made me lower my guard. I recognized that in real time and could not do anything about it. "What?" I said. "The pulses are not random. They have been syncing to a biological rhythm." He held my gaze with the careful precision of someone delivering something breakable. A heartbeat. 2 of them, actually. Very new, very small. I stopped breathing. "That is not possible," I whispered. "You said that already," he said gently. "I have not been with anyone. I have not bonded. I have not—" I pressed one hand flat against my own stomach without deciding to. The gesture was involuntary and immediate, and my psychometry fired the moment my palm made contact, and what I read was not my own emotional signature. It was 2 others, faint and fast and absolutely there. 2 heartbeats, new and threading, wrapped around something that felt like the beginning of a word neither of them knew how to say yet. The corridor swam. Elias caught me before my knees finished their resignation letter. "I have you," he said. "You do not have me," I said into his shoulder, with considerably less conviction than I would have preferred. His arms stayed exactly where they were. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere in the dark beyond my building, whatever had followed 15 wolves out of that forest was still waiting. And inside me, 2 impossible heartbeats kept their rhythm like they had never needed my permission to begin. I stayed in his arms for exactly as long as it took my legs to remember their job. Then I straightened, stepped back, and put 18 inches of professional distance between us because 18 inches was the minimum required for me to think in complete sentences. Elias let me go without resistance. His arms dropped to his sides, and he watched me with that patient, burning attention that was starting to feel less like observation and more like something I did not have a clinical term for yet. "Talk," I said. "What would you like me to explain first?" "All of it. Start with how this is biologically possible and work forward from there." He was quiet for a moment, not evasive quiet, organizing quiet, the kind that comes from someone choosing precision over speed. Fated mate bonds in the Alpha King lineage do not require physical contact to initiate. The bond begins at recognition. Scent alone, at sufficient proximity or emotional intensity, can trigger the biological process. I stared at him. "You are telling me you got me pregnant from Connecticut?" "Technically from the New Hampshire border. We had crossed state lines by the time the recognition event peaked." "That is not better." "No," he agreed, "it is not." I turned and walked 4 steps toward the window, turned back. This was becoming my primary method of processing information, and I was choosing not to be embarrassed about it. Outside, the snow was still coming down in the heavy, committed way of a storm that had nowhere else to be. The parking lot was empty. The road beyond it was empty. Whatever Callum's window meant in practical terms, the outside world was giving nothing away. "2," I said. "Yes. Twin pups. The pulse pattern is consistent with 2 separate signatures. I have had 3 Pack Affairs physicians confirm the reading remotely based on the frequency data." "You had physicians analyzing my biometric data before you introduced yourself?" A pause. "Yes. Without my knowledge or consent." The pause this time was longer and had a different quality. "Yes." I turned to face him fully. "I want you to understand that I am filing that under problems we are going to address in significant detail once we have handled the immediate threat. I am not letting it go. I am simply prioritizing." "That is fair," he said. It is more than fair, it is generous, and you should appreciate it. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. I do. My psychometry was still reading him through the point of contact when he had caught me. The impression left on my sleeves warm and present, even now. The fear for me was still there underneath everything, but layered over it now was something newer. A careful, almost tentative thing that I recognized from reading other people's emotional fields, but had not expected to find in an alpha king. Hope. Fragile and specific and pointed entirely in my direction. I pressed my palm flat against my stomach again, deliberately this time. The 2 heartbeats came through immediately, faint and fast, and my psychometry wrapped around them with the instinctive gentleness of something recognizing its own. They were not afraid. Whatever was outside this building, whatever had followed Elias and his pack through a February forest, these 2 did not know about it yet. They were just present, steady, existing with the uncomplicated confidence of lives that had not yet learned doubt. Something in my chest cracked open very quietly. They are healthy, Elias said. He had been watching my face. The physicians were certain of that. Whatever your ability has been doing, it has not affected them. If anything, the readings suggest the opposite. What does that mean? It means they may be the source of the amplification. He took one careful step toward me. Jasper, Omega pregnancies in the Alpha King lineage have documented histories of ability amplification in the carrier. What you are experiencing, the outward pulses, the increased range, the involuntary projections, it is not damage, it is not malfunction. Then what is it? Protection, he said quietly. Your ability is expanding to protect them. It has been since the moment the bond began. I stood with that for a moment. The idea that my body had been doing something enormous without telling me, not out of disorder, but out of instinct, out of a drive to keep 2 lives safe that I had not even known existed yet. Marcus appeared in the doorway at the far end of the corridor, and I was genuinely grateful for the interruption, because my emotions were organizing themselves into a configuration I was not ready to examine in front of Elias Cole. Motion sensors on the east perimeter, Marcus said. His voice was careful and flat, the way it got when he was managing his own alarm. Something is moving through the tree line, not deer. Pattern is too deliberate. Elias turned toward the doorway with a shift in his entire bearing that was immediate and complete. The man who had been standing in my corridor with hope, pressed carefully behind his gold eyes, became something else in the space of one breath. Not cold, focused. The kind of focus that comes from years of making decisions that other people's lives depend on. How many exits does this building have? He said. 4, I said. Front, rear, north loading bay, and the roof access ladder, which is not technically an exit, but could function as one in an emergency. Security. Standard Omega registered facility package. Cameras, bioscan entry, reinforced exterior doors. He nodded once. I need to shift in position at the east perimeter. My pack can cover the remaining 3 points once they are mobile enough. 3 of your wolves are not weight-bearing yet. 2 of them are now. He glanced toward the recovery room with a focus that said he had been tracking their vitals through pack bond the entire time he had been standing in human form, talking to me. By the time I reach the perimeter, the 3rd will be ready. I looked at him. He looked at me. The 4 hours Callum had mentioned were somewhere inside that timeline, and I did not know how much of the window was left. Jasper. His voice dropped. The focus did not leave, but something underneath it surfaced for just a moment, personal and unguarded. I know this is not how any reasonable person would choose to learn any of this. I know I have handed you an unreasonable amount of information in a very short period, and then asked you to function in a crisis on top of it. You have, I confirmed. I am sorry for that. The apology was simple and direct and carried no performance in it. It landed exactly the way real apologies do when they come from people who mean them, without decoration, without explanation, just the bare shape of genuine regret. I breathed through it. "Go protect my building," I said. His eyes held mine for one beat longer than necessary. "Stay inside," he said. "Do not go near the east wall. And if your ability pulses again, do not fight it." "I have been fighting it my entire career." "I know." Something in his expression shifted into something softer and more certain at the same time. "It was never yours to fight." He turned toward the recovery room to move his pack into position, and I stood in the corridor with 2 heartbeats pressed against my palm, and the cedar scent slowly fading into the recycled air of the facility. Marcus appeared at my shoulder. "Jasper." "I know, Marcus." "The Alpha King." "I know." "Is positioning his wolf pack around our building." "I am aware." "Because something is in our tree line." "Yes." "And you are pregnant." I turned and looked at him. He looked back at me with the expression of a man who had reached the absolute limit of his capacity to process new information and was simply reporting what remained. "Go make sure the rear door is bolted," I said, "and make better coffee. We are going to need it." He went. I turned back to the east wall. Outside, somewhere in the dark, in the snow, something was moving. And somewhere behind me, 15 wolves were deciding what they were willing to defend. I did not stay by the east wall. I went to the recovery room instead, because standing in a corridor waiting for something dangerous to happen is not a personality trait I possess. 3 of the wolves were fully upright by the time I pushed through the door. 2 more were attempting it with the shaky determination of patients who had received 0 medical clearance to be doing what they were doing. I pointed at the least stable one. "You, down." He looked at me, looked at the door, looked back at me. "I outrank whatever is outside," I said. "Lie down." He lay down. I was choosing to count that as a win. The remaining mobile wolves moved to the doors and windows with a coordination that required no instruction, no signal, no sound between them. Pack bond. The invisible architecture of wolves who had spent years learning each other's instincts until they moved like one organism split into many bodies. It was the most quietly extraordinary thing I had ever watched, and I had been watching wolves for 6 years. My psychometry came awake along my arms without warning. Not a pulse this time, a wave, building from somewhere low in my sternum and rising fast. And I understood in real time what Elias had said about not fighting it. Fighting it was like pressing both hands against a door with a river behind it. The pressure did not care about my objections. I let it go. The pulse moved outward from me in a ring I felt but could not see, warm and expansive, pressing through the walls of the facility and into the snow-heavy air beyond. My psychometry stretched with it, reading the perimeter in fragments. Elias at the east tree line, his presence a burning point of gold authority in the dark. His pack distributed across the other 3 points, steady and alert. And beyond them, the thing that had been following them. I felt it clearly for the first time. It was not a predator. It was not a rival pack. It was a person. One person carrying something enormous and desperate and grief-shaped, broadcasting it into the winter air with the uncontrolled intensity of someone whose emotional field had been leaking for weeks. The cold intent I had read earlier was not malice. It was fear, compressed and weaponized by desperation into something that had looked like a threat from the outside. My ability read the shape of it and knew it immediately. An Omega. Unregistered, young, terrified. The pulse from my sternum shifted without my direction, softened, recalibrated. It stopped pushing outward and started doing something I had no clinical category for. It reached, gently, the way you extend a hand to someone standing on the wrong side of a ledge. 30 seconds of silence passed. Then Marcus's voice came from the front room. "Jasper, there is someone at the front door. They are not threatening, they are crying." I was already moving. The young man at the front door was maybe 19, dark circles under his eyes, jacket 2 sizes too thin for a New Hampshire February, hands pressed flat against the glass with the specific posture of someone who had been running long enough that stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. His scent hit me the moment Marcus opened the door. Unregistered Omega, suppressed designation, ability markers I recognized because they rhymed with my own. Psychometry, uncontrolled, amplified, and completely untrained. He looked at me with exhausted, terrified eyes. "I did not mean to hurt anyone," he whispered. "I did not know I was doing it. I have been trying to stop it for weeks, and I cannot, and I did not know where else to go." Behind me, I heard the facility door open. Elias shifted back, stepping inside with quiet authority. He took in the young man at the door, and something in his expression moved from assessment to understanding in the space of a breath. "What is your name?" I said. "Sawyer," he said. "Sawyer Mills." I stepped back from the door. "Come inside, Sawyer." He came inside. He sat in the chair Marcus produced with the boneless relief of someone whose legs had been making the decisions for too long. I crouched in front of him and pulled off my gloves and held out both hands, palms up. "No latex, direct contact." "I am going to read what your ability has been carrying," I said. "It will not hurt. I need you to breathe and let me see it." He put his hands in mine. The vision was immediate and clear. Weeks of uncontrolled pulses radiating from a 19-year-old who had presented his ability with no support, no training, no registration, running from a family that did not understand what he was, and a system that had failed to find him before the ability found its own outlet. The frozen wolves, the cold intent, the pressure against the building walls. All of it was Sawyer, amplified by fear, shaped by desperation, carrying no malice whatsoever, just a kid who needed someone to tell him he was not broken. I sat back on my heels and looked at him. "You are not broken." He pressed his lips together hard. His eyes went bright. "Your ability is untrained and overwhelmed, and it has been trying to protect you the only way it knew how. That is not damage. That is not a flaw." I kept my voice level and certain because someone needed to be certain for him right now, and I had apparently been elected. "I am going to connect you with a designation counselor and an ability specialist first thing tomorrow. You are going to be registered properly and trained, and none of what has happened is going to follow you forward. Do you understand me?" Sawyer nodded. One tear made it down his face before he stopped the rest through what I recognized as an act of serious, personal will. "Good," I said. I stood up. "Marcus, tea, the real kind, not the gas station variety." "We do not have the gas station variety of tea," Marcus said. "See, growth." I turned around and Elias was standing 3 feet behind me, watching my face with those gold eyes and an expression I had no established defense against. Open and steady, and carrying something that had been building since a February forest, and a livestock thermometer, and a scent that had crossed state lines to find me. "You handled that," he said quietly. "I handled that," I agreed, without asking for help. "I am an independent professional. You are." The ghost of his smile was back, warmer this time, less surprised. "You are also carrying my pups and running a wildlife facility at 5 in the morning, and you just talked a frightened teenager down from a 6-week ability spiral with your bare hands. When you list it like that, it sounds like a lot. It is a lot. I am a lot," I said. "That is a documented fact about me." He took one step forward, slow, deliberate, the way he did everything. "Jasper, Elias. I have been Alpha King for 11 years. His voice was low and quiet and entirely unguarded. "I have made decisions that move territories. I have negotiated bonds and dissolved conflicts and held a pack system together through things I will tell you about when we have more time. And in 11 years, I have never once done something without knowing the outcome first." I waited. "I do not know how this ends," he said. "You and I I do not know what you will decide when the sun comes up and the crisis has passed and you have had time to think without a threat in the tree line. I do not know if you will want what this bond means, or if you will need time, or if there are 100 reasonable things you will require from me before any of this makes sense. He paused. But I know that I came 200 miles through a February blizzard with 15 members of my pack because the alternative was you facing something alone that you did not have the information to understand. And I would do it again, every time. The facility was quiet. Sawyer was wrapped in the blanket Marcus had produced from somewhere with the efficiency of a man who kept emergency supplies for exactly this category of mourning. 14 wolves were settled in their bays. The snow outside had gentled from a storm to something softer, the kind that falls when the worst of the night has passed. I looked at Elias Cole, and I thought about 2 heartbeats, small and steady and already decided. You have a lot to answer for, I said. I know. The biometric data without consent. Yes. The door code. Callum will be addressed. The part where you let me take your temperature with livestock equipment instead of just introducing yourself. The real smile arrived then, full and unguarded, and it was genuinely unfair. I was hypothermic. My judgment was impaired. That is the weakest defense I have ever heard. Probably, he said, and then, quieter. Can I stay? Not a command, not an alpha king exercising a claim. A person asking a question they were not certain of the answer to, standing in a fluorescent-lit wildlife facility at 5 in the morning with damp hair and gold eyes, and the most careful hope I had ever read on anyone's face. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my clipboard from the desk. Base 16 is empty, I said. It has a cot. The blanket is thin, and Marcus will absolutely tell this story at every staff meeting for the next 4 years. But it is warm, and you are still technically a patient who was clinically hypothermic 2 hours ago. He was quiet. That is not a no, I said. I want to be clear. That is not a no. Something moved through his gold eyes, slow and warm and certain, like sunrise happening behind glass. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. I walked him to base 16, handed him the thin blanket with zero apology, turned off the overhead light so only the low recovery room warmth remained. At the door, I stopped. Elias, he looked up from the cot. When my ability pulses again, I said, I am going to need you to teach me how to use it correctly. Both of us figuring out what these pups are going to need before they arrive. His expression did something quiet and enormous. I will be here, he said. I nodded, turned toward my own office down the hall, where a desk chair and a cold cup of terrible coffee were waiting, with no judgment. My hand pressed flat against my stomach without my permission, the way it kept doing now, the way I suspected it would keep doing for a very long time. 2 heartbeats, steady and small, and already certain of their place in the world, even if their father had just been assigned a bay cot and a thin blanket. Even if their other father was standing in a hallway at 5 in the morning, realizing that his entire life had just rearranged itself around a scent he caught on a winter wind. I smiled, just once in the empty hallway, where no one could file it as evidence. Then I went to finish my notes, because I was Jasper Calloway, and some things did not stop for alpha kings, or fated bonds, or twin pups, or the particular, devastating way a man could look at you like you were the answer to a question he had stopped asking. Some things like paperwork simply continued, and somehow for the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly right.